The universe had learned to categorize species by their threat level. The Valorian Empire had perfected this science over 10,000 years. They measured predatory instinct by claw length, venom toxicity, and pack-hunting behavior. They had charts, databases, centuries of empirical data. They had never met a human warrior before. The fighting pits of Valorian Station stretched across 3 city blocks, a sprawling coliseum carved from black stone and reinforced with electromagnetic shielding. 50,000 spectators filled the tiers, their various appendages and sensory organs trembling with anticipation. The scent of blood and ozone hung thick in the recycled air. This was where the Valorian elite came to witness glory. This was where champions were made, or where they were broken. A young human female stood in the center of the arena floor, alone. Her name was Dr. Sarah Chen, though that credential meant nothing here. Her uniform hung torn from the transport pod crash that had stranded her on this world. Her dark hair was matted with sweat and dust. She was barely 160 centimeters tall, a dwarf by Valorian standards. A child. The crowd didn't know whether to laugh or hesitate. Commander Vazik leaned forward from his observation box, his scaled face splitting into what humans might have called a smile. Around his neck hung the insignia of the Valorian High Guard, and on his wrist, the neural controller that had turned docile human colonists from the outer worlds into gladiators. Slaves, really. Expendable entertainment. We have a rare specimen today. Vazik's voice boomed across the arena, translated through a dozen different species' audio frequencies. Genetic reports indicate this one is not even a trained soldier. She was a planetary geologist on the human world of Kepler 442b. She crashed during our orbital enforcement action. But my xenobiologists suggest we test something. The crowd chittered and clicked with interest. We wish to understand, Vazik continued, why the human military insists on issuing these dog tags to their personnel. What significance could they possibly have? So we will give this specimen a choice. Fight and perhaps survive, or refuse, and we will simply harvest her organs for study. He tapped a display screen, and the creature's cage descended from the western gate. It was a Vreth, 7 feet of muscle and predatory evolution. For arms, teeth designed by nature itself for tearing. The Vreth species had conquered 17 star systems through pure brutality. This one had killed 342 previous opponents. The crowd roared. Sarah Chun looked at the dog tag hanging against her chest. 4 years of military training. 6 years as a geologist. 42 years of being alive in a universe that had suddenly shown its teeth. She closed her eyes and thought of Earth. She thought of forests, of mountains, of children playing in parks while their parents watched from benches. She thought of a species that had somehow survived plagues and wars and centuries of its own cruelty, yet still chose to send teachers and scientists to the stars. She opened her eyes and took a breath. The Vreth advanced with the confidence of a creature that had never lost. Its movements were fluid, practiced, devastating. The crowd had seen it move like this 1,000 times before. The outcome was always the same. It lunged. Sarah didn't meet it with aggression. She didn't charge forward like every other gladiator before her. Instead, she did something the Vreth, and more importantly the crowd, had never seen before. She dodged sideways, found the rhythm of its movements, and ran. Not away, not in fear. She ran around the arena, studying, learning, adapting. Her mind was doing what human minds did best: pattern recognition, prediction, synthesis. She wasn't just running. She was learning the Vreth's tells, its habits, the microsecond delay between intention and action that existed in every living thing. The crowd's excitement turned to confusion. Cowardice? Vazik muttered from his box, but his mandibles had tightened in irritation. The Vreth grew frustrated. Frustrated creatures make mistakes. It began to overcommit to its attacks, swinging too wide, leaving its ribs exposed. Sarah noticed. Her human eyes, evolved in Earth's gravity to track prey movements in 3 dimensions, saw gaps. Opportunities. She wasn't thinking in Vreth terms. She was thinking in human terms. Humans who had hunted mammoth across ice sheets for 10,000 years. Humans who had learned to track prey for hours in the heat of African savannas. Humans whose ancestors had taken down creatures 10 times their size through persistence, intelligence, and collaboration. She lasted 10 minutes. The Vreth's patience evaporated. It reared back and summoned all its strength for one killing blow. The crowd fell silent. This was the moment, the finality. But Sarah was waiting. She had noticed something on her fifth circuit of the arena. A weakness in the Vreth's muscle structure. A legacy from some ancient evolutionary conflict. Every time it reached back for maximum power, there was a single vertebra that shifted slightly out of alignment. A vulnerable point that a creature focused only on strength would never protect. She moved. Not with the Vreth's raw power. With precision. With the kind of knowledge that came from understanding bone structure and leverage. From weeks of military medical training. She struck exactly where evolution had left a flaw. The Vreth collapsed. Silence fell across the arena. 50,000 creatures held their breath. Sarah stood over her defeated opponent, breathing hard, her human chest heaving. She was bleeding from 3 different places. Her left arm hung at an angle that suggested significant damage. But her eyes were clear, conscious, alive. More importantly, the dog tag hung visible around her neck, and Commander Vazik's neural controller flickered uselessly against her skin. The crowd didn't know what to do. Their entire understanding of combat hierarchy had just been inverted. A human, a small, fragile human, had defeated a Vreth champion. Impossible, Vazik breathed. But his instruments didn't lie. His scanners showed the Vreth was alive, but neurologically shattered. The Vreth would fight again, perhaps, but never with the same predatory confidence. The commander tapped his controls, and another cage descended. This pattern repeated 5 more times. Each opponent grew more formidable. Each time, the crowd expected the human girl to fall. And each time, she did something extraordinary. Against the Kalthaar hunter, she didn't fight its strength. She used its speed against it, creating vector equations with her body that the Kalthaar's brain simply couldn't compensate for. The alien had won 700 previous matches. It lasted 4 minutes against Sarah. Against the Threnodian Twin Consciousness Collective, she exploited the lag between each creature's neural synchronization, forcing decisions faster than they could coordinate. They tangled themselves in confusion and collapsed against each other. Against the Zepthian swarm fighter, she did something that shocked even the watching xenologists. She stopped attacking. Instead, she began to move in deliberate patterns, using her body as a teaching tool. The Zepthian, evolved for complex hive coordination, eventually recognized the pattern. She was showing mercy, showing the alien a way to surrender with dignity. It did. When the 7th opponent fell, something shifted in the crowd's consciousness. This wasn't luck. This wasn't freak chance. This was something else entirely. This was mastery born from a fundamentally different way of understanding the universe. Vazik stood from his command chair, his mandibles clicking in a way that the translation systems interpreted as agitation. The arena was already changing its bets. Prey was becoming champion. The natural order, the Valorian understanding of might and hierarchy, was collapsing. "Bring her to the observation chamber," he commanded. 2 Valorian guards entered the arena, weapons raised. Sarah didn't resist. She could barely walk. Her injuries had accumulated across the 7 matches. Her ribs were definitely cracked. Her vision blurred intermittently. But her mind remained sharp, assessing threats, calculating probabilities, doing all the things that had kept humanity alive long enough to leave Earth in the first place. The observation chamber was exactly what she expected. Sterile, clinical, decorated with the trophies of a species that measured worth only in conquest. Vazik stood before her, towers above her human frame. "What are you?" he demanded. "Your species reports suggest you're not even apex predators on your home world. Fragile, short-lived. Yet you move with the grace of dancers, the intelligence of philosophers, and the efficiency of programmers. You treated the Zepthian with mercy, deliberately, strategically. I have never encountered such a thing." Sarah's voice was hoarse from exertion, but steady. Because we learned, she said, that to survive we don't only need to be strong. We need to be flexible. We learned that the most dangerous thing in the universe isn't fangs or claws. It's adaptability. She paused, gathering strength. On Earth, we hunted creatures twice our size. We did it by working together, by planning, by understanding our enemies not as monsters, but as problems to solve. We evolved fighting other humans, other species, our own nature. We learned to beat things we couldn't overpower by outsmarting them, by understanding them, by finding the spark of sentience even in our enemies and knowing that today's opponent might be tomorrow's teacher. Vazik was silent for a long moment. His neural implants flickered with calculations. The Zepthian, he finally said. Why did you allow it to surrender? Because, Sarah replied, it recognized a pattern, my pattern, the pattern of something that didn't just want to kill, something that wanted to understand, to teach, to eventually coexist. When your enemies see mercy as a strategy rather than a weakness, they recalculate. They see you differently, and maybe, just maybe, they start to see themselves differently too. Word of the human girl spread through Valorian Station like radiation through a reactor core. A human female, alone, had defeated 7 champions without dying, without even using excessive force. The pits filled beyond capacity, standing room only. Every species with access to the arena requested tickets. Vazik, to his credit, recognized a historical moment when he saw one. He offered Sarah a different choice. Walk free now or face one final opponent. The victor, human or alien, would be granted their freedom and something more. They would be given a voice, a seat at the Galactic Council, the chance to speak for their entire species. Sarah asked for a medical kit and 2 hours. When she returned to the arena, her ribs were bound. Her wounds were sealed. She still moved like she'd been through a crucible, because she had. The final opponent emerged from the eastern gate, and the crowd gasped. It was a Dominion caste warrior, the highest evolution of the Valorian species itself. These creatures had fought in the wars that conquered star systems. They had personal kill counts in the millions. They existed at the absolute apex of predatory evolution. For the first time, even Sarah's human eyes reflected something like fear. The Dominion warrior circled her slowly, casually, letting the crowd build anticipation. This was mercy in a way, giving the human time to contemplate its own extinction. You are brave, the Dominion said in low, guttural tones. But bravery is not victory. And then it attacked. It was everything the others had been, concentrated and refined. It was speed and power and centuries of evolutionary perfection. It was a predator that had never known defeat. Sarah fought with every ounce of training, every fragment of strategy, every scrap of human ingenuity. But the Dominion was simply better. Stronger, faster, more experienced. After 3 minutes, Sarah was on her knees, bleeding from wounds that were getting difficult to recover from. The Dominion raised its killing limb. And then, Sarah laughed. The sound echoed through the arena, and the Dominion paused. No prey ever laughed when death was certain. No prey ever found joy in their final moment. Do you know what's funny? Sarah gasped. You're the best fighter I've ever faced. By every measurable standard, you should have killed me 5 minutes ago. The Dominion tilted its head, confused. But you didn't, Sarah continued, pulling herself forward. Because somewhere in this fight, you started thinking about it. You started wondering how I survived so much. You started asking yourself questions instead of just acting on instinct. And that's the human infection. She stood unsteady but upright. We don't have your strength. We don't have your speed or your natural weapons or your evolutionary perfection. But we have something you've spent the last 1,000 years trying to kill out of the galaxy. Curiosity. Wonder. The ability to see an enemy and think, but what if I didn't have to kill them? What if I could learn from them? She took a step forward. You're a predator, Dominion. Perfect, beautiful predator. But I'm something different. I'm human. And humans? We're the only species in the galaxy that looks at something that could destroy us and tries to understand it instead. The Dominion stood motionless. Then, slowly, it lowered its killing limb. The crowd erupted. Not in approval of victory, something far more profound. They erupted in the recognition of transformation. They had come to watch a human die. Instead, they had watched a human change the terms of existence itself. The Galactic Council met 3 weeks later. Sarah Chen stood before the assembled representatives of 1,000 star systems. Her wounds had healed as much as human flesh could in 3 weeks. The dog tag around her neck now hung above a ceremonial robe, the robes of a diplomatic representative. She was still 5 feet 4, still small, still fragile by the standards of the galaxy's predatory hierarchy. But when she spoke, the universe listened. "We humans have a history of being the prey," she began. "We were afraid of the dark until we learned to make fire. We were afraid of each other until we learned to build societies. We were afraid of the stars until we learned to reach for them. And the galaxy was afraid of us. Afraid of a species that could learn, adapt, and find kinship in the very creatures that could destroy us." She looked across the chamber, making eye contact with creatures whose biology her mind had learned to read through combat. "You measure strength by destruction. We measure strength by survival with mercy. You measure intelligence by the speed of conquest. We measure it by the depth of understanding. And you've mistaken our capacity for compassion for weakness. But compassion isn't weakness. It's the highest form of strength, the strength to show mercy when you have every right to vengeance." The Dominion warrior stood in the council chamber, and when it spoke, its voice carried the weight of revelation. "We have hunted and conquered for millennia," it said. "We believed this was the nature of civilization. We believed that hierarchy must be maintained through fear. But this small, fragile human showed us something we had forgotten, that a civilization that only knows conquest cannot grow beyond conquest. We are prisoners of our own nature. But perhaps we do not have to remain so." The chamber fell silent. Not the silence of uncertainty, but the silence of worlds turning on their axis, of ancient certainties crumbling, of a galaxy suddenly understanding that it had been measuring progress by the wrong metrics all along. Sarah felt the weight of 50,000 Valorian spectators' attention, still watching from the observation galleries. She felt the broadcast reaching toward Earth, toward human colonial worlds, toward every star system that harbored human life. She thought of her colleagues at the Geological Survey. She thought of the people who had sent her to study distant worlds, never suspecting she'd have to teach the galaxy itself. And for the first time, the Valorian Empire, that ancient, predatory, unconquerable force, understood something their 10,000 years of data could never have measured. They understood what it truly meant to be human. Not the ability to conquer, but the ability to transcend the need for conquest. Not the strength to defeat enemies, but the wisdom to transform them into teachers, partners, friends. The Dominion warrior approached Sarah after the council adjourned. Up close, its presence was almost overwhelming. A creature that could have crushed her with a single limb. Instead, it extended that limb in a gesture that had no precedent in Valorian history. A gesture of respect. "Your species will change everything," it said quietly. "I hope you understand the weight of that gift." Sarah looked up at the creature that had come closer to killing her than anything in her life. She saw not a monster, but something magnificent struggling against the chains of its own evolutionary programming. She reached out and touched the extended limb. "We'll figure it out together," she said. "That's what humans do. We figure things out together." And for the first time, the galaxy understood. Not from conquest or submission, not from treaties or threats or the ancient language of violence that had shaped civilization for 10,000 years. They understood from watching a small, fragile human girl step into an arena designed for her death and emerge as something far greater than any champion had ever been. They understood what it meant to be human, not to be the apex predator, but to be the species that could stand before apex predators and show them the stars held something more valuable than dominance. Something called hope. If the story of human resilience moved you, Subscribe for more tales of humanity's journey among the stars. Because in the darkest corners of the galaxy, against the most impossible odds, humans continue to teach the universe the meaning of grace.